In the winter, when the southeast corner of Kansas locks up with frost and the snow lies flat to the horizon, there are patches of field where the snow will not hold. It melts the instant it touches the ground, and a faint warmth rises off the soil, as if something under the furrows is smoldering. Something is. Beneath this part of Kansas lies one of the largest coal seams in the state's history, and in places it burns, an underground fire creeping through the rock, heating the earth from below for decades at a time. That is not a legend, that is documented geology. But here is the story they have passed down in these parts since 1887, and it begins exactly where the documented fact runs out. They say that spring a farmer was ploughing the far corner of a field, the stony, awkward corner he usually worked around, when his plough stopped dead, caught on something hard under the sod, not a boulder. He cleared the dirt away with his hands and found a flat stone, and it was not a natural slab. It was laid, block fitted against block, squared edges running off at one side beneath ground that had never been turned. A floor. He pried up one of the blocks to see what was under it, and out of the gap came warmth. Not the damp of a cellar, but heat, like the breath of a banked oven. What did the farmer's plough really catch on in the far corner of his field? Who lays a stone floor where, by every record there is, no settler had ever set foot? And what is still down there, warm, in the Kansas ground that will not let the winter in? Whatever the plough found that spring did not go anywhere. It is still down there, where it is warm. To understand why the heat matters, and why it is not just a tall tale, you have to understand the ground itself, because the ground in southeast Kansas is genuinely strange. The Cherokee and Crawford County coalfield stretches across more than 300 square miles, and the main seam under it, the Weir-Pittsburgh coal, became the most heavily mined coal bed in the entire history of the state. The first underground shaft was sunk near the village of Scammon in 1874, and in the decades after, the two counties were riddled with as many as 290 significant mines and countless smaller ones, until the whole district was a honeycomb of worked-out tunnels and shafts. In some places, the coal did not even hide. It outcropped right at the surface, and the first settlers who came through in the 1800 seconds were astonished to find black coal lying in the open, able to pick it up by hand and carry it home to burn. A land with coal at the surface is a land that can catch fire underground, and coal seam fires are one of the most relentless phenomena on Earth. Once a seam ignites, from a lightning strike, a brush fire, a mining accident, it can burn underground for years, for decades, sometimes for over a century, creeping along the seam far below the surface, impossible to reach and nearly impossible to put out. The most famous example, Centralia in Pennsylvania, has been burning underground since 1962 and emptied an entire town. The same fire lives under parts of Kansas. It warms the rock, it melts the snow, it turns patches of ordinary farmland into ground that steams in January. So when the story says the stone the farmer found was warm, the warmth is the one part of the whole account that needs no explaining at all. The fire was already there. The question the story forces on you is what the warmth was rising through. Every farmer who has worked stony ground knows the corner the story is talking about. There is always one, the patch that fights the plough, too rocky to be worth the trouble, left to weeds at the edge of an otherwise good field. The man in the 1887 account had worked around his for years. The detail that the discovery happened there, in the one corner he had always avoided, is the kind of thing that makes the story ring true to people who farm, because it is exactly where a buried thing would survive untouched. Not in the middle of a field turned over season after season, but at the neglected margin where the plough never bit deep. They say it was a dry spring, and he had finally decided to break that corner and bring it into use. The plough caught, jolted him hard, and when he went to free it, he expected the usual field stone. What stopped his blade instead had a flat top and a straight edge, and when he scraped along it the straightness kept going, block after block, fitted so tight he could barely get a knife between them. He was standing, the story goes, on a floor that someone had laid with care, in a corner of Kansas prairie, where the official history says there was nothing but grass and buffalo until his own generation arrived. And the moment he understood that, the next thing he did was the thing any of us would do, and the thing the old-timers say he came to regret. He started to dig down along the edge to find out how deep it went. Now I want to be careful here, because this is the point where a story like this earns your trust or loses it, and I would rather it kept it. There is no county record of a farmer finding a stone floor in southeast Kansas in 1887. What there is the account itself, passed down locally, and the kind of physical backdrop that makes it impossible to dismiss out of hand. So here is what the story says, told plainly. As he dug down along the lip of the floor, the blocks kept going, course below course, a wall dropping away beneath the floor's edge into the dark. And the deeper he went, the warmer the stone got. Near the surface it was merely not cold. A few feet down it was warm to the palm. Further still, the story says, the heat coming off the stone was enough that he could not keep his hand against it, and the air rising out of the gap carried the dry mineral smell of something cooking far below. He had opened, by the old accounts, the top of a shaft or a stairwell, a worked opening going straight down, and from the bottom of it, out of the deep Kansas rock, came heat. He could not see the bottom. He dropped a stone and never heard it land. And he made the decision that turns this from a curiosity into the part of the story people lower their voices to tell, because he decided he was going down far enough to see what was making the heat. Here is the turn, the thing that the warmth and the floor only mean something when you put them together. Step back and look at the two facts side by side. Fact 1. Under that field a coal seam was burning, the way seams burn all across that part of Kansas, heating the rock from below. Fact 2. Someone, at some point no record accounts for, laid a fitted stone floor and a worked shaft directly above it. And those two things do not belong together, because a burning coal seam does not lay stone floors. Fire is chaos. It cracks rock, it collapses ground, it leaves slag and ash and ruin. It does not leave squared blocks fitted edge to edge in deliberate courses. Someone built that. A burning seam is natural, a fitted floor is made. And this one was made directly over the fire, as though whoever laid it knew the heat was there and built above it on purpose. That is the detail that should turn the back of your neck cold, even as the ground stays warm. Not that there was a floor. Not that it was hot, but that the two were in the same place, that a structure had been deliberately set down over a seam of underground fire, in a corner of Kansas where the history books insist no one capable of laying such a floor had ever been. The fire explains the heat. Nothing in the official record explains the floor. And the farmer, by the old story, was lowering himself down a warm stone shaft toward a fire someone had built a roof over, without any idea which of those two things he should have been more afraid of. There is a reason a story like this could take root in southeast Kansas specifically, and it is that the people there knew, better than almost anyone, what the ground was hiding. Starting in the 1870s, this corner of the state filled up with miners, thousands of them, drawn from Italy and Austria and Wales and Yugoslavia and a dozen other countries to dig the coal. So many nationalities crowded into the camps that the region earned the nickname the Little Balkans. These were people who spent their lives underground, who sank shafts down through 200 feet of sandstone to reach the black coal below, who understood the rock of that country in a way no one on the surface ever could. And the things miners brought up, and the things miners talked about after their shifts, became the folklore of the region. They knew where the seams burned. And this is not folklore. Across these old coalfields, the federal government still tracks burning gob piles, mountains of mining waste that catch fire and smoulder from within for years, some of them ranging from a single acre to 1.5 miles long, impossible to fully put out. People who grew up in mining country knew the burning piles by sight, the ground that steamed, the snow that would not lie, the heat you could feel through your boots in the dead of winter. They knew which old workings had filled with gas or heat or water. They knew that the ground under their fields was not solid earth, but a honeycomb of coal and rock and fire and abandoned tunnels. So when a story spread about a farmer finding a worked floor and a warm shaft in a field, it did not fall on sceptical ears. It fell on a community that already knew the ground beneath them was full of openings and heat and things that did not belong. A community whose whole existence depended on what was buried down there. The miners did not doubt that something could be down in the rock. They only wondered, the way the story has them wonder, who had been down there first, long before any shaft was ever sunk. Pull back from this one field, and you find that ground all over the world has a habit of handing up things that the official timeline cannot place. Across the American Midwest and beyond, there are documented accounts, some credible, many not, of objects and structures turned up by plows and picks and mine shafts that seemed older or stranger than they had any right to be. Worked stone where no worked stone should be. Tunnels and chambers broken into during mining that no one could explain. Most of these have ordinary answers, and I am not going to pretend the strange ones prove a lost civilization under Kansas, because honest doubt is worth more than a cheap thrill. But the pattern underneath all of them is real and worth naming. The ground keeps things. It keeps them far better and far longer than we expect, and it gives them back on its own schedule, usually to someone who was not looking for them. A farmer breaking a stony corner, a miner sinking a routine shaft. Southeast Kansas proved this on a grand scale within living memory. The same county where the story is set, Cherokee County, turned out to be so honeycombed with abandoned mine workings, so saturated with what a century of digging had left behind, that the federal government eventually declared a huge swath of it one of the most contaminated places in the country. Acidic water rising out of old shafts, 4,000 acres of tailings, ground that had been hollowed out and then quietly walked away from. People farmed on top of it for generations without knowing the half of what was underneath them. That is the real lesson of that ground. You can live your whole life above a buried world and never know it is there until something forces its way back up. And when the ground gives something back that does not fit, the response is almost always the same. Not investigation, burial. The hole gets filled, the field gets replanted, the story gets told a few times and then dismissed, and the ground closes back over whatever it offered up, which is, by the old accounts, exactly what happened in that field in 1887, after the farmer climbed back out. The story does not give him a triumph, it gives him a decision and the decision is the most human and the most haunting part of the whole thing. By the accounts passed down, the farmer did go down, far enough into the warm stone shaft to understand that it was no cellar and no animal den, that it was worked and deep, and that the heat at the bottom was not something he wanted to reach. And when he climbed back out into his own ordinary field, under the ordinary Kansas sky, he did not run to town. He did not bring back officials or reporters or curious neighbours. He filled it in. He put the block back, packed the gap with earth, dragged stones over the corner, and by the old telling, he never broke that corner of the field again, left it to weeds for the rest of his life, and would not speak of what he had seen at the bottom. People in these stories almost always do this, and we tend to call it cowardice or superstition, but think about what it actually means. A man finds something that should rewrite what we know about his own ground, and his strongest instinct is to put it back exactly as he found it, and never look again. Whatever was down there did not frighten him into telling the world, it frightened him into silence, into making sure no one else would go down after him. By the old telling, for years afterward, on the coldest mornings, he would walk out to that corner of the field and stand at the edge of it, watching the one patch where the frost never took, and a thin breath of warmth still rose from the buried stone, and then turn around and walk back to the house without a word. He had put the floor back over the fire, the way he believed it was meant to be, and that is the part the documented geology cannot touch and cannot disprove, that the most natural response to finding a floor over the fire for the one man who supposedly saw it was to seal it back up and carry it to his grave. So here is what we are actually left holding, stripped down to what can be said plainly, because the plain version is strange enough. The coalfield under southeast Kansas is real, 300 square miles of it, and the seams in it burn, heating the rock and melting the snow in patches of ordinary farmland to this day. That is not in dispute. The miners who filled that country knew the ground beneath them was a honeycomb of coal and fire and abandoned openings, and they built a whole culture on what the earth was hiding. Into that real and burning ground, a story was planted in 1887 and never quite died. A farmer's plough catching on a fitted stone floor in a corner where no one had ever been. A worked shaft dropping down warm into the dark, and a fire someone seemed to have built a roof over long before any record begins. Maybe it is only that, a story, grown in the imagination of people who lived above a burning, hollow land and knew it. Or maybe the reason it would not die is that the ground it describes is exactly the kind of ground that keeps such things, and gives them back, and then closes over them again. The honest truth is that no one can point to the field anymore, and that is the part that will not let go of you. The fire is still down there. The ground still steams in winter where the snow will not hold, and if there is a floor over that fire, laid by hands the record never accounted for, it is still down there too, still warm, exactly where one frightened man supposedly buried it, and swore never to dig again. If a warm stone floor over an underground fire, in ground that refuses to go cold, is the kind of thing the official story would rather you never went looking for, then you already know what to do before you scroll away.